You are here. The darkness is absolute. There is no gentle fade. One moment there is nothing, and then there is cold, bone deep, wet, and settled. It has been inside you so long you can no longer remember warmth as a physical sensation. You remember it the way you remember a name you once heard spoken, distantly, with no certainty it was ever yours. The floor beneath you is earth, packed and worn smooth by generations of feet, but earth nonetheless. You sleep on it. You eat above it. When you die, you will return to it in a field not far from here, marked by a stone someone found near the river, if you are remembered enough to merit the effort. The structure around you is small, smaller than you are imagining. The walls are wattle, woven branches plastered with a mixture of mud, dung, and straw, and they breathe, not metaphorically. The wind moves through them at night, a low and constant conversation between outside and inside that no fire can fully silence. The thatch above you is old. Last winter it allowed water in, and the corner near the door has not fully dried since. The smell is difficult to name if you have not lived inside it. Livestock, smoke, wet wool, human bodies that have not been washed since the cold arrived, and beneath all of it, something fermented, something animal, something ancient. There are animals in here with you. A goat, perhaps a pig, if this has been a good year. Their warmth is not incidental. It is architectural. You positioned them here deliberately, as your father did before you, because their bodies add degrees to the air that might otherwise kill an infant or an elder before spring. You do not think of this as poverty. You have no word for it that carries shame. This is simply the texture of existence. Outside, England in the year 900 is a fragile and dangerous thing. The Danelaw has carved the country into contested halves. Viking settlements sit in the north and east, and even here, in the western Midlands, in a village of perhaps 40 souls, you have grown up knowing that raiders can come from the river. The lords who claim authority over this land change with the outcomes of battles you were never consulted about and will never fully understand. Alfred the Great died 9 years ago. His son Edward now rules Wessex. These are names you may have heard from a traveling priest or a merchant passing through. They do not change what you do tomorrow morning. They do not change what you owe. This world does not care if you survive. You are a ceorl. That is the English word for what you are, and it sits in the middle of a rigid order that was decided long before your birth and will remain unchanged long after your death. Below you are the slaves, the theows, men and women taken in raids or born into bondage, who own nothing, not even the children their bodies produce. Above you are the thegns, the warrior landowners, men who carry weapons as a legal right and who owe military service to a lord above them in turn. Above the thanes are the ealdormen, and above the ealdormen is the king, who is, in the theology of this age, the representative of God's will on English soil. You are not a slave. That distinction matters to you in ways that are both practical and spiritual. You have legal standing in the 100 Court, the local assembly where disputes are heard. You can own animals. You can accumulate, in theory, enough wealth to rise. In practice, the mechanisms of your existence make that accumulation nearly impossible. You work a hide of land, roughly 30 acres, some of which is yours to farm for subsistence, and some of which you owe to your lord in labor. 3 days a week, sometimes more during harvest, you work his fields before you work your own. This is called week work, and it is not optional. It is the price of your tenancy, of the protection his walls and his sword theoretically provide, of the mill you use to grind grain, the oven you use to bake bread, the forest you enter to gather wood, all of which are his, used at his permission. You did not choose this arrangement. You were born into it, and the son you have, the one who survived past his 3rd year, will be born into it after you. Social mobility exists in this world the way miracles exist, possible in theology, rare in practice, and usually dependent on forces entirely outside your control. Now that you understand who you are, consider what the next 14 hours will require of your body. Before dawn you are already moving. There is no ceremony to waking. You rise because the cold becomes intolerable once the fire has died to ash, and because the animals need tending before the light arrives, and because there is no version of this day in which lying still is an option. In autumn, which is where you find yourself now, the work has a particular urgency. Harvest is either complete or nearing its end. Grain must be threshed, beaten from the stalks with a wooden flail in a rhythm so repetitive that men have gone temporarily deaf from the constant percussion of it, so physically demanding that the shoulders and lower back accumulate injuries that compound year over year. You know men in this village who can no longer lift their right arm above their shoulder. They are not old. They are 35. You will also be plowing. The heavy clay soils of England in this period require an asymmetrical plow, the caruca, which cuts deep and turns the soil rather than merely scratching its surface. This plow requires a team of oxen, sometimes as many as 8, which means that several families must cooperate and pool their animals to work even a single furlong. This cooperation is not warm, it is logistical. Disputes over whose oxen walked harder, whose strip of land was plowed last, whose family owes more workdays in recompense. These are the arguments of your village, and they simmer in the cold alongside everything else. Your hands are remarkable objects. The skin of your palms has layers to it, callus over callus, built through years of handle grip and rope pull and cold morning metalwork. Archaeological evidence recovered from Anglo-Saxon burial sites, skeletal remains examined by modern forensic anthropologists, reveals the specific deformations that this life produces. Compression fractures in the lumbar vertebrae, hyperostosis at the shoulder joints, wear patterns on knee cartilage consistent with sustained kneeling on hard ground. Your body, in other words, is an archive of your labor. It records every field, every harvest, every winter morning you went out before sunrise because there was no choice. You do not stop at midday. You slow, if there is bread, and if the weather allows it. Then you continue. Darkness ends the work, not exhaustion. Exhaustion is always present. It is not a signal. It is a condition. What you eat is not a matter of preference. It is a matter of what exists, what the season permits, and what the Lord has not already taken. Bread is the architecture of your diet, not the bread of later centuries, not even a close cousin to it. This bread is dark, dense, made from rye, or a mixture of rye and barley, sometimes containing chaff and grit from the grinding stones, which over decades wears your molars to flat, smooth surfaces. Dental records from Anglo-Saxon cemeteries show near-universal tooth wear among adults over 30 and frequent abscess infections that would have caused chronic pain and, in some cases, death through sepsis spreading to the jaw and skull. You eat pottage, a stew of whatever is available, leeks, onions, cabbage, dried beans, turnips, cooked in a clay pot over the fire for hours. Sometimes there is salt pork, or smoked fish, if the season has been kind. The pig you slaughtered at Martinmas, around November, will be salted and hung, and you will ration it through winter with a calculation so precise it occupies a genuine portion of your mental energy for months. The Lord's forest is closed to you for hunting. Deer, boar, and most game animals are legally reserved for the nobility in this period. Poaching is not merely illegal. It is a category of offense that carries mutilation as a standard penalty. Blinding, castration, removal of a hand. You know this, and you do not hunt deer. You set snares for rabbits in the hedgerows, which is a gray legal space most lords tolerate, and you fish the streams when permission is implied by absence of enforcement. In a good year, your family eats enough. In a bad year, a wet summer, a blight on the rye, an early frost, the calculation shifts. You begin rationing before you have to, because you have seen what happens to families who ration too late. The children go first, in bad years, not by decision, by biology. The harvest of 900 AD in much of England was fragile. Viking raids had disrupted agricultural stability across large portions of the country for decades. Entire villages had been abandoned, fields had gone fallow. The food supply for a Sea-Oral family operated with essentially no surplus buffer. One failure cascaded directly into hunger, and hunger cascaded directly into vulnerability to everything that followed. You drink water. You also drink ale. This is not indulgence. Ale in this period is weak, what would later be called small ale. with an alcohol content low enough that it functions primarily as a safe source of hydration in a world where water sources are genuinely dangerous. Your water comes from a stream or a shallow well shared by the village. Into this water flows everything the village produces biologically. Animal waste from the common field where cattle graze. Human waste from the areas behind the huts where people relieve themselves. Areas that are not far enough from the water source because the village was not designed with contamination in mind. No one in this world understands germ theory. The relationship between water and illness is felt empirically. People get sick after wet seasons. Children die at higher rates near certain streams. But the mechanism is invisible, and therefore its prevention is impossible. Dysentery is a permanent presence, not epidemic, endemic. It kills the old and the very young with statistical regularity. It weakens the working-age population during plowing and harvest seasons at the worst possible moments. The symptoms are understood as spiritual disruption, or the consequence of sin, or the will of God, or the work of malevolent forces that can be addressed through charm and prayer. The actual cause, Shigella bacteria in contaminated drinking water, will not be identified for nearly 1,000 years. You have also known people to die from tooth infections, from injuries that became septic, from childbirth, from fevers that arrived in autumn and did not leave until the person carrying them had. You do not have a physician. The village may have a woman who knows which plants reduce fever and which roots ease cramps, and her knowledge is real. Some of it is pharmacologically valid, inherited through generations of empirical observation. But she cannot stop a systemic infection once it has taken hold, and she knows this, and she administers her remedies with prayers because that is what fills the space where certainty should be. You have had children, more than are alive today. This is not unusual. This is not even discussed in the way that the shape of the hills is not discussed. It is simply the landscape of the life. Anglo-Saxon infant mortality rates, reconstructed from cemetery analysis and comparative demographic data, suggest that somewhere between 30 and 40% of children born in this period did not survive to their 5th year. The causes were numerous: respiratory infection, gastrointestinal illness, birth trauma, simple cold, the crushing weight of poverty on an immune system that had never been adequately nourished. You name children early because the church requires baptism shortly after birth, and because unbaptized souls cannot receive Christian burial, and therefore, in the theology of this age, cannot enter heaven. The urgency of naming is also the urgency of spiritual protection. You have learned not to assume. The grief of this world is not smaller than grief in other times, but it is expressed differently. It is compressed. It is carried while plowing and while threshing and while salting the pork and while lying on the cold floor at night. It does not stop the work, because the work does not stop for it. You know parents who have buried 3 children, 4 children, who still rise before dawn and walk to the field and do not speak of what they carry, because speaking of it serves no function that the cold morning will allow. On Sunday, you go to church. Or rather, you go to the structure that serves as church. A modest building, perhaps of timber in this period and location, perhaps stone if your village sits near a minster. The priest is not always learned. Literacy in 900 AD England is concentrated in monasteries. Parish priests in rural villages are often men of limited theological education who conduct the liturgy from memory and translate its meaning to their congregation through image, gesture, and the authority of repetition. The church tells you that your suffering is purposeful, specifically that it is the consequence of the fall, of Adam's sin in Eden, and that through patient endurance of earthly hardship, through obedience to God's established order, through tithes paid and prayers spoken and labor accepted without complaint, you are accumulating merit toward the life that follows this one. The Lord above you is placed there by God. The King above the Lord is anointed by God. To resist the order of things is not merely rebellion, it is heresy. It is a spiritual error as serious as any other. This is not to you obviously false. You have no competing framework. The church is the only institution in your world that offers a coherent explanation for why things are as they are, a roadmap for what to do about it, and a promise that the map leads somewhere worth going. The monastery down the valley is the largest building you have ever seen. Its library contains more written knowledge than exists anywhere else within 20 miles. Its monks are the only people in your world who have the time to think about things beyond immediate survival. Their authority is not merely enforced. It is, in part, earned. You pray in the morning and in the evening. When your child was sick with fever, you prayed continuously for 3 days. The fever broke. You understood this as answered prayer. You had no way to know whether it would have broken anyway. Neither did anyone else. The 100 Court meets periodically, and it is here that the law comes closest to touching your daily life. The law of 900 AD England is a mixture of royal decree, local custom, and the written codes that descend from earlier kings, Ine of Wessex, Ethelbert of Kent, and now the laws shaped by Alfred's reign, which had sought to standardize justice across his kingdom. If you are accused of theft, you must produce oath helpers, men of your community willing to swear to your innocence. If you cannot produce enough, or if your social standing is too low to compel the right people to speak for you, you may be ordered to trial by ordeal. You carry a hot iron 9 paces, and your hand is bound. 3 days later, the binding is removed. If the wound is healing cleanly, you are innocent. If it is infected, you are guilty. The logic is theological. God will not allow an innocent man's flesh to fester. No one in this room is thinking about the fact that wounds in this environment, dressed in this manner, with this level of medical knowledge, will become infected with a regularity that has nothing to do with guilt. The ordeal is not designed to find truth. It is designed to resolve conflict through a process that both parties accept as legitimate, and its legitimacy rests entirely on the shared belief that God is watching and intervening. Remove the belief, and the system is simply a mechanism for confirming whatever outcome the powerful already wanted. Public punishment is common. Flogging, mutilation, and execution are carried out in visible places. They are not hidden. They are the point. A man whose hand has been removed for theft communicates something to everyone who sees him walk through the village for the rest of his life. Fear is not a byproduct of justice in this world. Fear is its primary instrument. The Danes are not an abstraction. You were born during a period when Viking raids had been reshaping England for over a century. The great heathen army arrived in 865. Alfred fought them to a standstill and negotiated the Danelaw in 878. In the year you inhabit, 900 AD, the border between English Mercia and the Danelaw runs through the Midlands. Depending on your exact location, Danish settlements may be a single day's walk from your village. The raids that preceded the current fragile peace were not abstract historical events. They were physical facts that destroyed villages, killed men, enslaved women and children, burned grain stores that could not be replaced before winter, and collapsed the agricultural infrastructure of entire regions. The fear of that destruction has not faded. It is carried in the posture of older men in this village, in the way they look toward the river in autumn, in the stories told near fires that are simultaneously warnings and memorial. Your lord's obligation, theoretically, is to provide military protection. In practice, this protection is inconsistent. The fyrd, the local levy of fighting men, can be called up, but it is composed of corals like you, men whose primary skill is not combat, who own no armor beyond a wooden shield and perhaps a spear, who are being asked to stand in a line against professional warriors who have raided coastlines from Ireland to Constantinople. If the village burns, you lose everything: the grain, the animals, the shelter, the accumulated small tools that took years to acquire. You start over, if you are alive to start over. Many do not. This vulnerability is not background noise. It is the ground condition of your life. The reason the Lord's protection, however imperfect, is something you pay for without serious question. Something is better than nothing. In 900 AD England, something is often all there is. If you are a woman in this village, the previous sections require revision. You do the labor described above, with the addition of the labor that was not described: the grinding of grain by hand at the quern stone each morning, which produces the shoulder injuries archaeologists have identified in female skeletal remains at a rate matching those of male agricultural workers. The production of textiles, spinning, weaving, sewing, which occupies every hour that fieldwork does not. The management of the household economy, the preservation of food, the care of children, the tending of the sick. Childbirth in 900 AD England is a medical event managed without any of the tools that would make it reliably survivable. The woman is attended by other women of the village. The complications that kill women in childbirth, hemorrhage, obstructed labor, sepsis, are neither preventable nor treatable in this environment. Maternal mortality rates in pre-modern England are estimated at approximately 1 to 2% per birth, which means that across a reproductive lifetime of 6 to 8 pregnancies, a woman faced a cumulative mortality risk that was not trivial and was understood as such. The prayers before labor were not ceremonial, they were sincere requests. Your legal standing as a woman in Anglo-Saxon England is more complex than it will be in later medieval centuries. You can own property. You can bring legal claims. You have a mourning gift from your husband upon marriage, a gift that is legally yours. These are real protections. They do not change what your body endures, what the cold costs you, what childbirth asks of you, or what happens to your children if you do not survive to raise them. Consider what it would take to break this system. Not improve it, break it entirely. The answer, it turns out, is almost nothing available to you. The people who endure this life are not passive victims of forces they cannot name. They are pragmatic negotiators with a reality that offers very few terms. They bargain with their lords through collective foot-dragging, through slow work on lords' days that cannot be directly proven as deliberate, through the accumulated social pressure of the village community, which has its own internal logic and its own forms of resistance. They bargain with God through prayer and observance that is genuine in its faith and also strategic in its hope. They bargain with the cold through the positioning of animals, the maintenance of fire, the repair of thatch, the 1,000 small technical decisions that together determine whether a family survives winter. They are not waiting for a better world. They are making do with this one, with the materials it has provided, using the knowledge that has been handed down through generations of people who were also making do and who also survived. That chain of survival, across plague years and raided harvests and Danish armies and hard winters that killed the old before spring, is not nothing. It is, in fact, the only reason you exist to read these words. The world of 900 AD England did not collapse under the weight of its own brutality, though the weight was real. It persisted because the people inside it were not fragile. They were, against every reasonable expectation, profoundly durable. They did not endure because the system was just. They endured because endurance was the only door the world had left open. If you found yourself inside this world today, not as a visitor, but as a seorl with a hide of clay land and a family to feed before the first frost, you would last the first week on determination, the second on desperation, and the third on the slow realization that there is no version of this life in which you get to stop. These people did not have the option of finding it overwhelming. Neither, in the end, did they have the option of finding it meaningless. They built churches with their hands and named their children and buried their dead, and walked out before dawn on cold mornings for reasons that had less to do with hope than with the simpler, more stubborn fact that they were still alive, and the field was still there. That is not inspiration. That is endurance. They are not the same thing, and the distinction matters. If this world reached something in you, a question you are still sitting with, consider, which part of your modern life would you surrender last? What is the floor beneath your comfort? The thing you would not give up even when everything else was already gone? Leave that question in the comments. There is no right answer, only an honest one. If you want to go deeper into worlds like this one, colder, harder, and stranger than this, subscribe and stay close. Next, we go somewhere that will make England in 900 AD feel almost generous. You have been warned.